Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. We're in the company of Christopher Dickey of the Daily Beast. Say hello again to Christian Wernicke of Germany's Süddeutsche Zeitung. With us as well, Antonia Di Bella of Italian state broadcaster the Rai, and Catherine Field, correspondent for New Zealand print and radio. We were talking before the break about the right tack of the Republican Party in the United States. Now, that seems to be mirrored on this side of the Atlantic with a startling result in what's normally known as a bastion of tolerance called Scandinavia. Christian Thulesen Dahl of the anti-immigrant Danish People's Party finishing a stunning second in the general election, garnering more than 20% of the vote. Christian Wernicke, he's now sitting pretty as the man who either will or won't enter government. And this rise of the far right in Denmark is, of course, not the first case we've seen.
No, it fits to the Scandinavian trend at the moment. Sweden has the lowest percentage of right extremism with 12%, but then all are in the around almost 20. Denmark now 21, being the kingmaker for a conservative government. Now the damage for Europe is not so severe because Denmark does not belong to the core of Europe, if there is anyone. But so it's they don't. For example, we don't need their trouble again for solving the euro crisis we're suffering from. But it's concerning, and it adds to a trend that is also reflected in other countries. We just had a former French president talking about a flood from the canalization, and by referring to migrants.
A leak. Migrants as a leak.
Yeah.
And that's Nicolas Sarkozy.
And it's flooding the house. And I mean, it's a kind of wording and the kind of stuff that this right-wing party in Denmark was talking about, and they are winning the debates amazingly.
And the causality or the link being made, the dots being connected between the rise of these parties and the rise of the number of immigrants.
Yeah, there's one difference between Scandinavia and other countries, especially in the south of Europe, but also in comparison with France. Unemployment is not that high, and still it's not an economic issue. I think that's something that the French socialists very often misinterpret. President Hollande, I think, still believes that once he gets the job numbers right, everything will be solved for the Front National. It's not. And Denmark is one example for that. They don't have such a high unemployment, but still the fear of identity, especially in a small country like Denmark, is so vibrant that they go for these choices.
All right, and this trend that we're witnessing, it comes amid tensions over immigrants, tensions over migrants. They flared up at the Franco-Italian border this week. We saw Italian police in the Riviera town of Ventimiglia chasing migrants from the beach where they'd been camping out. Both the cops and the refugees really have reason to rue the French, who've been stopping them from crossing over, insisting rules are rules when it comes to point of entry into the EU. That essentially keeps the current unprecedented wave of Mediterranean boat people as an Italian problem.
A country such as Italy cannot allow France or anyone else to have ships in the Mediterranean, but to leave the migrants in Italy. Either this is a European problem and we resolve it all together, or if it has to be an Italian problem because Europe is closing its eyes, Italy can handle that. But I say that with the bitterness of one who thinks Europe is a large house of common values, and I think the moment has arrived to say with force that no countries can close their eyes to this problem, and we need to work in the interest of everybody.
He goes further than that as he expresses that bitterness, Matteo Renzi. He says he might have a plan B if ever his neighbors don't open their doors a bit more.
Sometimes I don't agree. This time I agree. I think Europe has to face this problem together or die, because this is the only moment in which Europe can make a different step and accelerate on this growth. As a as a continent. You need, for example, to put humanitarian posts in North Africa to process the people, to have sponsorship for a group of people, company who want to have immigrants workers. But you have to do something in a European vision. You cannot stick to the stupid Dublin Treaty that says that where the immigrant arrives, he has to stay. It's ridiculous. It's a slap of France to Italy to block the frontier. And there's no way you don't go. From one side you have Sarkozy who said water and leak, but from the other side you have Hollande who said nothing. And so I expect that the next meeting Sunday, Hollande will meet Renzi in Milano, and then we'll have a meeting at European level. Europe has to do something together to face in a pragmatic way. I remember I was in America when the Haiti had a problem of immigration to America. Clinton took the Haitian, the boat people of Haiti, put a camp in Guantanamo, not still a prison at the time, processing over there the people too. And that is pragmatic. It's not a problem. We get them, they are a friend of us, or we shoot at them. We have to find a pragmatic way to let them in and not to destroy our economies.
And is it doable?
Well, I don't know. I hope I know that if Europe doesn't do something like that, it's over.
Right.
I think one of the things Europe could do is actually work with Italy to process these people much quicker. Europe has got the officials in Brussels, who heavens knows there's enough of them, who could get together, who could really start processing these people. In Italy, you don't need to move them around. And the ones that really are economic migrants, put them on the plane back to where they came from. And the ones who really do meet the status and need protection, they will be the ones that will be rehoused somewhere in Europe. And Brussels also needs to say our neighbourhood policy for North Africa has failed. We have just failed. We haven't got a policy to try and keep these people in these countries, to give them hope. And they've got to go back and look at what they've been putting on the table, because it's hopeless.
All right, and this plan B, there's some speculating that what the Italian prime minister might even do is just put Schengen visa stamps inside all the. Well, I guess they don't have passports with them.
Passports.
But inside the documents of these migrants, and say, hey, make it everybody else's problem.
I mean, come on, Italy's already doing that. I mean, why do you think the French tried to close their border? And they're not going to succeed in doing that. Just like the British closed their border. What we're talking about, Ventimiglia. What do you think is going on at Calais? What's France doing about the immigrants in Calais? Next to nothing, as far as I can tell. They used to have places to house them and process them, but then they decided that was somehow encouraging them. So they shut those down, and now you have a jungle in Calais with people living really in the wild, in a city just across the English Channel from Dover. So it's a problem that has to be addressed coherently and Europe-wide. That's absolutely the case. But the depth of the problem is almost impossible to fathom. It's not just about economic. If somebody's coming from Eritrea, how do you distinguish an economic migrant from somebody who's living in fear for their lives? Both things are true. Syria. What do you do about Syrian refugees?
You can't send people back to Syria.
It's not only Italy. I mean, Greece is basically an open door for refugees coming out of Syria into Turkey, into Greece, through Macedonia, and and across the Balkans into Western Europe, Germany. Now, what are you going to do about Syrians? Are they not going to get political asylum? The problem is not all, but so much of European immigration policy is not immigration policy, it's asylum policy. It was never thought through as immigration. But then who are the Americans to point to that problem? The Americans have 12 million Mexicans who have illegal status in the United States, and they cannot for the life of them find a way to regularize their status. So it is a huge problem across the world.
And as we can see, Europe divided over it. Europe also divided, you might say, or at least being tested by those negotiations with the Greeks, the haggling coming to a head, what with an end-of-month deadline looming, and also with EU and IMF counterpart negotiations going on. And on that score, you can sort of look at who's in St. Petersburg. Alexei Tsipras, this Friday, attending an economic forum. There he signed a memorandum to build a gas pipeline. Christian Wernicke, the European Commission President Donald Tusk calls it a game of chicken. What's going to happen now? Because the clock's running short.
I have to admit, First of all, I don't know. Secondly, my sense is that more than ever before, this is a really tight game, and partly, not only, but during the recent weeks, partly really due to the Greek tactics in these negotiations, this is coming up to a point where it's not where the usual success story of Brussels compromise, you can describe it with the color gray. It's always gray. It's not very exciting, but it's gray, and we keep on going. Greece has managed to turn this in a choice between black and white. And it's either we win and get your money, or you win and we have to leave the Eurozone.
But Christian Wernicke, people are very critical of Angela Merkel, and they're saying the problem is that she needs to make a black and white decision, that she has so far let things move along. We know that there needs to be a sizable haircut, much more than the 1.6 billion we're talking about at the end of this month.
That's true.
And at some point in time, sooner rather than later, she needs to be the one to sell that to her own domestic public opinion, but she doesn't have the spine to do it.
Well, the haircut, first of all, we are talking now public debt. We're talking here about the European taxpayers paying for that. And if you look, yes, the big numbers are France and Germany. Germany over 60 billion, France over 40 billion. If you look at who's paying the most in terms of GDP, it's poorer countries. It's Slovakia, it's Spain that's suffering in a crisis. So I hate to be here to defend my own government, but I can assure you this is not a German point of view anymore. If Mr. Tsipras has managed one thing in terms of European unity, he has united almost everybody against Greece. And it's the other countries, especially in the south of Europe, who have been going through horrible reforms I partly think could have been avoided with a more flexible German approach. But these countries are now the most angry. They are the most angry countries because they've suffered. They've paid the price. They're getting on their feet again, and now they see that somebody wants to get them to pay the price for not doing the homework.
All right, we'll see how it plays out. Let's tell you about the tweet of the week from His Holiness the Pope, stating, "The earth, our home, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth." Christopher Dickey. This, of course, coming on the day he unveiled an encyclical in which he called for urgent action to reach a carbon-cutting deal before the end of the year.
Well, good luck with that. I mean, I think that it's helpful for someone with the kind of moral authority that Pope Francis has to come out and make this kind of statement. But I don't think it's going to have any kind of lasting impact on the debate, because the economic interests and the financial interests that are at stake are so enormous that the moral imperatives are not likely to have much effect.
He's going to the United States before, of course, the end of the year.
Yes, and he will be there and he will be talking about these issues. But the United States is not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is China and India, and they are not going to be listening very closely to what Pope Francis has to say. So where does all this take us? It's another affirmation that global warming and climate change are huge difficulties. It may help to silence, conceivably, some of the idiots we were talking about earlier who are running for president of the United States and claim that there's no problem with climate change. But it's not going to change, in fact, the overall issue.
Catherine Field?
I agree with Christopher. What the Pope said is barely news. And if we look back, John Paul II said that environmental protection was a moral issue for the church. He hasn't really said anything new. What is important is put it into church doctrine, that we should not just think about ourselves and how we deal with our family, but how we should look at the environment around us. Why is it getting so much play? Well, people don't have that much faith in their politicians at the moment. So when someone like the Pope comes along, who touches
this Pope.
this particular Pope, who is no great reformer, by the way. A lot of what he's saying is nothing new. He's coming up with, you read this encyclical, there are a lot of 13th century poetry from St. Francis of Assisi in there, and a lot of prayers in there. It's not a ripping read by any stretch of the imagination, but because there is such a disconnect between people and their politicians, someone with the moral standing of this particular Pope can jump in there, he can grab the headlines in a way that politicians just can't.
Antonio Di Bella?
I would like to see Pope Francesco in the place of Juncker. I mean, we need a political leader like this in Europe. That's the only political leader we have that has a vision. That's the point.
Yeah.
They can disagree or not, but that's what we miss in Europe. And the Social Democrats, especially in France, in Italy, in Germany, we have no leader with a vision. This man has a vision, say something, say that the stock exchange is not something that has to rule our lives, it's something else. Maybe will be not heard in America, in Wall Street, but say something of a different vision of the world.
I'm not sure.
Thanks.
I'm not convinced. No, you can't rule Brussels, neither the United States, like you rule the Catholic Church. That doesn't work. It doesn't work.
It works. It's a great ruler too, eh?
In a way, I'm more optimistic about this one here because this move by the Pope might help a little bit, Chris, a little bit to convince the fundamental religious right in the US that there is some truth about climate change. I've attended meetings in the US where people were telling me this is something that God wants or it's something that can't be because God must it's either his wish or God would never give us something unstable as earth.
I think one of the interesting things about the Catholic Church, about this Pope particularly, but the Catholic Church for many years now, is it's coming down on the side of science. On the side of science, very clearly. American evangelical churches do not do that. They're coming down absolutely diametrically opposed to science. That's what the great creationist versus evolution debate is about, which is still amazingly current in the United States. But it's not that debate is not part of the Catholic discussion.
I know it's not convincing everybody, but I'm just wishful thinking here. A little bit of help from a friend.
Christian, say your prayers.
All right.
I'm Protestant.
And by the way, throwing palm oil on the fire of this debate, a spectacular flip-flop by France's environment minister, Ségolène Royal, who also happens to be the president's ex-partner, saying 1,000 times sorry. This after first calling for a boycott of Nutella, that children's chocolate paste favorite, her beef, Nutella's heavy use of palm oil, palm tree plantations that mean the chopping down of rainforests in places like Brazil and Southeast Asia.
We have to stop eating Nutella, for example, because it has palm oil.
But Nutella's so good.
Well, we have to stop, because palm oil has replaced trees.
You could ruin a company saying you shouldn't eat Nutella.
Well, they should use other raw materials.
All right, she made those remarks before she realized that Nutella's an Italian brand, with outrage that included the Prime Minister's wife and daughter going out of their way to eat a Nutella-filled crepe at the World Expo in Milan. Antonio Di Bella, for or against Nutella?
I'll invite to my place tonight to eat Nutella, or Nutella party, first of all. And then I would say that this woman, Ségolène Royal, is unfit to lead. Because the third time I hear something totally stupid.
Only?
Fireplace, more than 3. Fireplaces, tax for the trucks, what else? She speaks, and then, okay, I was sorry. This is a minister, this is the best minister, this is the vice president of France. We're talking about the lack of leader in the left of Europe. Here we have an example.
Which Ségolène Royal is right, by the way? Should there be a boycott of palm oil or not?
No. Palm oil is a serious problem we have to face, but as not in the way. It looks like my son is much more intelligent, will take on Facebook something and say, okay, palm oil sells chemical trails, and what else? Twin Towers are self-made bombing. All this myth of internet, and she's the minister of the Republic, the best one.
They really do have a communication problem in that government at the moment, because what was it, just 2 weeks ago, Manuel Valls, the Prime Minister, went off to Berlin and he handled that really badly. Oh, I went for a meeting. Oh, and he happened to take his children with him. And
it was a private plane, and it was to see the UEFA Champions League final.
Exactly. You know, I really think they should perhaps go across the Atlantic, get some guys from the New York consultancy of public...
Donald Trump.
Yeah. And they've really got to get our message, these guys.
Christopher Dickey, Nutella?
I can't stand this stuff. I mean, but I think that Ségolène, I think everything that people are saying about Ségolène is exactly right.
But what about palm oil then?
Well, to the extent, the Nutella manufacturers are saying that they are replanting the trees, they are trying to reforest and so on. What she's arguing is that it was taking out rainforest, and that's a bad thing. If it heightened consciousness of that particular issue, and we can keep Nutella, well, good.
All right,
if you like Nutella.
Christian Wernicke, final word on this.
Yeah, I think then pragmatically, Nutella seems to be on the right track by using durable ways of production, blah, blah, blah. If it heightens awareness of this, okay, but this doesn't ratify the more or less regular gaffes by French ministers or prime ministers. I mean,
Free Nutella in Free State.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it there. The verdict on Nutella and on French politicians. Christian Wernicke, Catherine Field, Christopher Dickey, Anthony Di Bella. Stay with us because it's our Media Watch segment. And we say hello to Emma James. Emma, bring us back to what is our top story and grappling with this horrible hate crime that took place in Charleston, South Carolina.
Yes, absolutely. There is really one topic of discussion that you're seeing everywhere in the media and everywhere online, and that is racism. And one of the groups, if you like, that is coming in for the most criticism is actually the media. And one of the articles that really spells out this problem in the clearest way is the Washington Post. This is from Anthea Butler, who is an academic who has basically said shooters of colour are called terrorists and thugs, why are white shooters called mentally ill? Now, she goes on to say that you won't hear the word terrorism on major media outlets when discussing this particular case. She says instead they'll go to their go-to explanation for these kind of crimes, which will be mental illness, she says. She says Dylan Roof will be humanised and called sick, a victim of mistreatment or inadequate mental health resources. And this, she says, is the real whiteness of America, the power of whiteness in America.
So is it an argument for not using the word terrorism at all, or for calling him a terrorist?
She doesn't actually go as far as spelling that out, but what she is saying is, why is it that African Americans or Muslims who commit these kind of crimes are characterised as terrorists and thugs, one or the other usually, and they're deemed to be motivated by evil intent, whereas the treatment of white people who commit these crimes is just so very different. Now, she's not really offering the answers, and I think in many ways nobody really can on this one, but there is a lot of agreement. If you look online, there are lots of comments like this one. They're always quiet, softly spoken and acting alone when they're white. Otherwise, terrorism, extremism, entire religions is deemed to be to blame. This tweet also, ABC, the American news network, just referred to the Charleston shooting as a tragedy. No, a car crash is a tragedy. Shooting up people in a church is terrorism. So some people clearly feel that this is terrorism, but it is one of those questions that is always asked when things like this happen. Where do you draw the line? At what point is it a killing spree? At what point is it a mass murder? And at what point is it actually terrorism?
Christopher Dickey, I know the Reuters news agency never uses the word terrorism because of you always get into these value judgments when you use it.
Oh, look, the random slaughter of civilians with a political end, that's terrorism. I don't think that's hard to define. And that is exactly what this was. And in fact, on the Daily Beast, we've been calling it terrorism. That people are so reluctant to use that word is strange in this case. And I think that the criticism is justified.
Well, interestingly, another journalist, very well known, who is calling this terrorism is Jon Stewart, and he really has provided one of the most eloquent accounts of the way that the media feels when handling a story like this one. Now, he actually chose not to do his sort of trademark jokey intro, left out all of the comedy and said simply he was too sad to write jokes after coming in and looking at all the news regarding Charleston. Let's take a listen to what he actually had to say on his programme.
This is a terrorist attack. This is a violent attack on the Emmanuel Church in South Carolina, which is a symbol for the black community. It has stood in that part of Charleston for 100 and some years and has been attacked viciously many times, as many black churches have. And to pretend that, I heard someone on the news say, well, tragedy has visited this church. This wasn't a tornado. This was a racist. This was a guy with a Rhodesia badge on his sweater. And, you know, so the idea that we're, you know, I hate to even use this pun, but this one is black and white. There's no nuance here.
So really no room for wiggle room, according to Jon Stewart. It's terrorism, plain and simple, and he isn't alone in having that kind of view. Now, the other thing that isn't really beyond question is the motive for this attack. As Newsweek has reported, Dylan Roof is now believed to have told police that he carried out this attack in order to start a race war. So no ambiguity there whatsoever. But what is interesting is that he's also said that he deliberately left someone alive in order that she could then go out and tell people exactly what had happened. And perhaps that in itself is the reason to call this terrorism, because what other motive for doing that than to spread terror?
All right, an ideological act, if you will. Emma James, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.